121. The marble floors gleamed under the soft morning light as Viktor Morozov entered his mansion, his footsteps echoing faintly through the long corridor. He wasn't supposed to be home for another 2 days, but he'd cut his business trip short, craving the comfort of his mother's gentle smile and the warmth of his wife's embrace. He set his suitcase down silently near the door, savoring the rare peace of the early hour. From the kitchen came the faint clatter of dishes. Familiar, domestic, harmless. But then he heard it, a sharp voice, cold and impatient. It was Daria's, his brow furrowed. She never spoke to his mother like that, or at least she never had when he was around. He moved closer, footsteps slow and quiet, each one accompanied by a growing unease that pressed against his chest. The voices grew clearer now. "You're so helpless," Daria hissed, her tone laced with contempt. His mother's frail, trembling response was barely audible. "I'm sorry, dear. I dropped the cup." Then came the sound of porcelain shattering, followed by a sharp metallic clatter. Viktor froze mid-step, confusion and disbelief twisting inside him. His mother's voice, always so gentle, now trembled with fear. He reached the kitchen doorway just as the sound of boiling water filled the air, a kettle whistling, its shrill cry cutting through the tension like a blade. What happened next seemed to move in slow motion. His wife lifted the kettle with trembling hands, her face twisted in rage. "You're nothing but a burden," she spat, and before he could move, before his mind could even process what he was seeing, she tilted the kettle forward. A scream tore through the house. His mother collapsed, clutching her arm, the scalding water cascading down her sleeve. The kettle clanged to the floor, rolling across the tiles. The smell of burnt skin filled the air, sharp and nauseating. Viktor's breath caught in his throat as he stared at the scene. The woman he'd sworn to love standing there, panting, her eyes wide with shock at what she'd just done. His mother's sobs broke the silence, soft and painful, each one echoing through him like a blow. He didn't shout. He didn't move. For several unbearable seconds he simply stood there, his heart thundering in his chest, his entire world collapsing in that single, horrifying moment. Then something inside him snapped, not with fury, but with cold, deliberate clarity. The image before him, the woman he once adored and the mother who had raised him, would haunt him for the rest of his life. And as he finally stepped forward, reaching for his mother, he knew that everything that had existed before this moment was gone forever. Daria's tears began the moment Viktor's eyes met hers. "It was an accident," she stammered, her voice trembling as she backed against the counter. Her hands shook as if trying to wash the guilt off them, though the kettle still hissed faintly on the floor beside her. But Viktor didn't speak. His silence pressed down on the room harder than any shout ever could. The only sound was his mother's weak whimpering, a fragile voice that broke through the heavy air. Viktor moved to her, his every motion precise, almost mechanical. He took off his jacket and wrapped it around her trembling shoulders, careful not to touch the blistered skin on her arm. She looked up at him, eyes full of pain, confusion, and love. "Son," she whispered, "don't be angry. Please." He lifted her into his arms, her lightness terrifying him more than the burns themselves. Daria rushed after him, her cries echoing through the marble halls. "Viktor, please." "I didn't mean to." She slipped. "The kettle. Please believe me." Her words bounced uselessly off the walls, but Viktor's jaw tightened. He didn't look back. He carried his mother out the front door, the morning sun now cruelly bright against the horror of what had just unfolded inside. As he helped her into the car, he saw the steam rising from the skin on her arm, the angry red burns twisting up toward her shoulder. His stomach turned. The drive to the hospital was endless. The engine roared, the tires tore against the asphalt, but inside the car there was only the faint sound of his mother's breathing. Daria kept calling his phone, each vibration a reminder of betrayal. He ignored every one. At a red light, his mother's hand found his, her touch light, trembling. "Don't let hatred eat you," she murmured weakly, barely audible. "Sometimes, forgiveness is heavier than revenge." Tears stung his eyes, but he kept his gaze fixed on the road. "Rest, Mama," he said softly. "We're almost there." Hours later, after doctors took her in and the sterile hospital air replaced the suffocating tension of home, Victor sat alone in the waiting room. The weight of his mother's words lingered in his chest, battling with the image of Daria's face twisted with rage. He could still hear the sound of that scream, his mother's pain, Daria's shock, his own silence. The nurse's gentle voice broke through his thoughts. "She'll recover," she said. "The burns are serious, but she's strong." Victor nodded, but inside, something fundamental had already shattered. The woman he had trusted most had crossed a line that could never be undone. When he finally stepped out of the hospital, the evening sky was a dull, fading gray. He looked toward the horizon and exhaled, a slow, heavy breath that carried everything he could no longer bear. His home, his marriage, his peace, all of it lay behind him, tainted and broken. And though he hadn't yet decided what he would do, one thing was certain. Daria had not only burned his mother's skin, she had burned away every trace of the love he once felt for her. The mansion felt colder when Victor returned that night, though every light in the house was on. Daria was waiting for him in the living room, her face pale and streaked with mascara, her hands trembling as she clutched the edge of the couch. She looked smaller than he remembered, fragile even, but the image of her standing over his screaming mother still flickered in his mind like a flame he couldn't extinguish. "Victor," she whispered as he entered, "please, I beg you. It wasn't what it looked like. I lost my temper, but I didn't mean to hurt her. You have to believe me." He didn't answer. His footsteps were steady, almost eerily calm as he crossed the room. When he finally stopped in front of her, his eyes were hollow, his face devoid of the warmth she used to draw strength from. "I saw everything," he said quietly, his voice steady but cold. "There's nothing left to explain." She tried to reach for his hand, but he stepped back, the distance between them now wider than the entire room. "You think I'm a monster," she sobbed. "But I was under pressure. She kept criticizing me. Enough," Victor interrupted softly. The word silenced her more effectively than any scream could. He looked around the room, at the expensive furniture, the glittering chandeliers, the walls that had once echoed with laughter, and felt only emptiness. "You will leave this house tonight," he said finally. Daria froze, her lips parting in disbelief. "What?" she breathed. "Victor, please, we can fix this. I'll apologize to her. I'll do anything." He turned his gaze back to her, and for a moment, something almost like pity flickered in his eyes. "Pack your things," he said, "but leave your wedding ring here." His tone was so calm, so final, that she understood instantly there was no place for her in his life anymore. She hesitated, then slowly slipped off the ring and placed it on the coffee table. The tiny circle of gold glinted under the chandelier, the symbol of everything they had built and destroyed. Days passed, and the story spread quietly through the city. The great Victor Morozov had stepped down from his company, transferred his shares to charity, and vanished from the world of luxury that had once defined him. When a journalist finally found him months later, living with his mother in a modest cottage by a lake, he seemed like a different man. Gone were the suits, the power, the cold calculation in his eyes. When asked why he had given up everything, Victor simply said, "Because wealth can rebuild a house, but not a heart that's been burned." He looked out the window toward the garden, where his mother sat in a shawl, reading in the sun. A faint smile touched his lips. There was peace now, painful, fragile, but real. And far away, in a city filled with glittering lights and empty promises, Daria finally understood what true punishment felt like. It wasn't prison, scandal, or revenge. It was being erased from his world, his memory, and his love, forever.